Hello and welcome to the Home Assistant Podcast, episode number 54. My name is Phil. Joining me as usual, I've got my co-host, Rohan. How's it going?
Good.
And joining us, we also today have Brandon. Good morning.
Good morning. Hey, guys.
This episode is sponsored by Home Assistant Cloud by Nabokasa. Easily and securely access your local Home Assistant instance remotely for a small monthly fee that also supports the Home Assistant project. The configuration is done by the user interface, so there's no fiddling with router settings, SSL certificates, or any YAML.
All right, so another big release, 0.97 this week. And before we get on with Brandon's awesome stuff that he's doing with Home Assistant, I thought I'd just quickly touch on something that we spoke about last episode with John.
I've gotten away from hard coding any kind of values within Home Assistant and started using basically variable values in the UI. So I'll make a slider, for instance, or I'll make the ability to select numbers or time slots within the UI instead of having to hard code anything.
So in this case, Home Assistant is your alarm clock, or kind of everything gets driven by there.
Yep. Everything gets initiated from there and then driven elsewhere.
Okay.
Yep.
So you've obviously got a bit of trust there in Home Assistant that it's actually going to control that whole process of waking you up.
Yeah.
So on Reddit, user Monty33 reached out to me in a private message and said that I found a way to integrate my phone's alarm app with Home Assistant so that Home Assistant knows when I'm planning to get up, but leaves the waking up part to my phone. So I use an app called Alarm Droid as my alarm clock. And this could be adapted to many other apps as well, but in the Alarm Droid, there is a setting to display a notification for upcoming alarms. And I think the default is like 30 minutes or something, but he's increased it to 1 hour. The next step, he uses Tasker. So I have a profile set up in Tasker to look for a notification that has the text next alarm. And once Tasker sees it, it then sends a HTTP post request or webhook through Nabokasa, and which then tells Home Assistant that he will be waking up in the next hour. And then from there, Home Assistant can trigger off some automations based on that. So that's a really cool way to make another variable alarm. It also gives a little backup that, if you don't want to trust Home Assistant to be responsible for waking you up, you can just set your phone alarm as you normally would, and then integrate that with Tasker and get that pushed over to Home Assistant. So I thought that was worth mentioning. I'll leave links to the apps that Monty's mentioned in the show notes on Has Podcast, but I don't think iOS that would work because iOS is very jailbreak locked down, but a really cool implementation for Android users.
That's very cool. Well, hopefully we see more apps that have alarm apps with APIs in it, right? So that you can actually start leveraging things like this. That'd be kind of cool, actually. So if anybody is thinking of making an alarm app, here's your foray into it.
Yeah, that's all right.
So let's talk about 0.97 a little bit. So first and foremost, I just wanted to throw out there, Python 3.5 is no longer supported. So if you're on a manual install of Home Assistant, where you have Python installed manually, you need to upgrade to 3.6 or later. With that said, if you're using the Docker image or anything similar, you don't really need to worry about it.
Yeah, Has.io and all the Docker images will already be running the latest version of Python anyway, but just in case anyone running their own instance, that's good to know.
Yeah, that's right.
Some new features in this release. One of the big ones that you'll see in this release, well, you won't really see, is improved accessibility. So a lot of HTML tags and buttons are going to have more attributes added to them, making sure that they're more compatible for screen readers. That'll be used for people that are vision impaired and use, the computer speaking what's on the screen for those people. So good to see that Home Assistant's thinking forward, and it's better to start improving the accessibility of an app before it, really grows and gets much larger than what it already is. So yeah, that's good to see happening as well.
Yeah. Also, the server control has been moved to its own config area. So, Marin Pool, after a Reddit suggestion, moved the server control settings. So things like validating a config, reloading has, and all of that kind of stuff is moved into a new section of the config screen. So look out for that.
I must say, when I installed the beta, I was actually about to go in and file a bug request saying, hey, how do I reset my config now? I've got my advanced options set in the in the profile, but you've just removed it all. But fair enough, it's just moved into this whole new section, which is a lot easier. A new integration, Apache Kafka. So Home Assistant can send all those events to Kafka, and Kafka is used for building real-time data pipelines and streaming apps. So I'm sure there is a lot of use cases for this. So it's going to be interesting to see some of the cool stuff people are going to do with this.
Yeah, and another contribution by Frank, 20 Milou. I probably really butchered that name, so I apologize. But now Home Assistant can see waste pickups in the Netherlands. So there you go.
That's cool. And FortiGate firewall presence detection has now been added. So if you're using a FortiGate firewall, you can now have devices that connect to it exposed to Home Assistant.
And Bluetooth light bulbs. So Avaya, although they don't support this anymore, if you have those today, Home Assistant can now control those light bulbs. So I guess the provider themselves, or the manufacturer themselves, Avaya, has stopped supporting the actual product. So if you're concerned about that, then here's a great way to get around that.
Yeah, I like when Home Assistant can come in and sort of take over where a company has just abandoned a product, right? Which in this case, lucky it was using Bluetooth. If it was a cloud-based, connection that needed a cloud server, then you might have been out of luck. But yeah, I think it's good to see, Bluetooth being able to be used in this case.
Yeah, I think those ones are a little harder to like ones that use cloud, unless you're actually building your own cloud around it and have their proprietary info, whatever. So, but for stuff like this, I think it's great.
And an interesting one, this release is the Rainforest Eagle 200. So the Eagle 200 is a device that I'm guessing you would stick, maybe already existing in your home, depending on where you are in the world. So it connects using Zigbee, Ethernet, and Wi-Fi to various behind-the-meter devices. So it includes smart meters, hot water tanks, smart outlets, solar inverters, and energy storage systems, so batteries or anything like that. So with Home Assistant, you'll be able to monitor the energy use of your home if you have a Rainforest Eagle 200 at your home. So that's really cool to see.
It's kind of a cool name too, Rainforest Eagle 200. Yeah.
Right.
Also, the French water provider, Suez, now has integration with Home Assistant. So you can actually see how much water your house has been using over the past few months, as well as the previous day. That's actually a kind of cool one, because now you don't necessarily need you don't need to tap your actual water pipes or anything like that. So you can actually pull it right from the provider. So that's kind of neat.
And you could even potentially, I'm guessing, depending on how accurate the data is, which I'm guessing if it's the water meter that they're using to bill you, would have to be pretty accurate. If you've got a leak in your home, I'm guessing you could do some, maybe some automation or trend over time and see if your house is all of a sudden using more water than what it usually would. Maybe you've got a leak somewhere and you can use Home Assistant to alert you for that.
Okay. So that's interesting actually. Yeah. Cause I was thinking you meant like when you started saying that, I thought you meant like leaks in the sense that, hey, there's a leak here, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, in that sense, I think that would make more sense. That'd be kind of interesting.
Yeah. You may not have a water leak sensor, everywhere, or, you might have a faulty hose out in the garden that's just watering your garden, but you wouldn't necessarily know you've got a leak somewhere.
Yeah.
Whereas, now with using this data, you could potentially, you wouldn't be able to know whereabouts it is, but you'll be able to say, hey, something's wrong. Like, let's look into it a bit more.
Yeah, or just, hey, your usage is higher than normal for this time of the month or this month compared to other months, or
yeah. And I guess you could also gamify your life a little bit. If you use a bit more water the day before, maybe you can't watch as much TV the next day or something like that, and Home Assistant can lock it down or something like that.
Yeah. Or one more piece of candy for taking a quicker shower.
Exactly. Like I'm sure there's a Black Mirror episode in there. All right, some breaking changes in this release, and a big one comes for the Google Maps location tracking. So if you use the Google Maps location service, you would know that you have to set up a separate account that you would log in and share your location with in terms of the Google world. Previously, you were able to specify a username and password in your Home Assistant configuration file. Moving forward from this release, you will no longer be able to specify a password. The reason for that is that the library that's being used by Home Assistant to communicate with Google is no longer accepting passwords. Instead, it will require a text file, which will exist in your Home Assistant configuration directory that stores, the cookie data. And cookie data is essentially whenever you talk to a website, the website can store some data on your browser to say, this is the session and this is the user that's logged in under that session. So if you're setting up the Google Maps location tracking for the first time, there are some instructions that will be available in the component page on homeassistant.io. And you can follow that instructions to generate a file that you'll need to place in your Home Assistant configuration directory. If you were previously using the Google Maps location tracking before 0.97, Home Assistant should already have generated that file for you. So when you come to upgrade to 0.97, the only thing you should really need to do is just remove password from your configuration file, and then it can still use the existing cookie file that exists in your config directory.
Interesting.
And I'm guessing that you will have to probably re-log in every few months when that cookie token expires. I'm guessing.
Yeah, that makes sense. But it's, you know what? From a security perspective, I think it's a little better. Also, speaking of, so Z-Wave network keys. So if you have Z-Wave network keys in configuration.yaml and in the UI, the configuration.yaml network password will actually override what's in the UI. So if you've done this in both places, you might want to be careful of that, because whatever you have in that file will actually be what's considered. So if you have two different passwords, this might break some stuff for you. If you have trouble connecting to some things after the upgrade, just try commenting it out in the config.yaml if that's what's wrong.
Yeah, I'm guessing when people upgrade, it's going to potentially use an old network security key, and people are going to be like, oh, all my devices disappeared for whatever reason. But hopefully that'll be a quick solve. One that affects the Ring camera component, the scan interval has been removed. So a lot of Ring products are coming out. They've got, a whole bunch of new smart home gadgets like lights and motion sensors and all that. So to support those devices in the future, the scan interval has been removed from the Ring camera component. And moving forward, if you want to change, how often Home Assistant dials Ring for an update, you can do it by specifying it in the Ring component sort of portion of your YAML config. So next to where you would put your Ring username and password, you will now instead put the scan interval in that position there. So now this shouldn't affect many people. It is only if you've manually chosen to decide the scan interval for the Ring camera component. If you have done that, you will just need to update your config for this release.
Also, the calendar platform. So the calendar platform has a few updates. So this will actually affect you if you have anything like Todoist in there, Google Calendar, or whatever other kind of calendaring kind of integrations that leverages that platform. So what happens is before 0.97, when an event gets completed or when it's done, Home Assistant would change it to a default value to basically say that there's nothing new coming up. After 0.97, what ends up happening is, so once that event once the time frame has passed and there's nothing else in the future, what's going to happen is the state of the sensor will actually stay as is. So the reason they had to do this is actually so that it's more compatible with other Home Assistant sensors. So instead of putting it back to a default null value or to a default no event upcoming kind of value, it'll stay the same as what it was. So automations that, if you have any automations based on this kind of things, you'll need to upgrade those, update them.
And the Nuki lock services, they've been changed. So if you're using a Nuki lock, you'll have to use the new lock.open service. And there's also a Nuki lock and go service. So yeah, if you're using any of those services in your automations, you will have to update for those this release.
So multi-room support has now been added for Snapcast. So just to be consistent with platforms like Sonos, Snapcast Join and Snapcast Unjoin have been kind of added too. So because of these changes, certain services have been renamed, things like Snapshot and Restore. So you'll have to deal with that, and you may have to. If you have any automations that rely on that, you may have to use that.
Cool to see that more like multi-room support has been added.
Yeah, I mean, that's cool. It's a step forward, right? So,
and some other interesting updates for this release. The first one is if you're a Spotify user, there's a new Spotify service to start playing a playlist. I know this one has been requested a lot, and it's something I use in my home with Sonos at least. just being able to start a Spotify playlist is really cool. So there's now the new service, Spotify.play_playlist, and there's also the ability to choose a random song as well. So that's cool.
Interesting. Yeah, because I guess I didn't realize that, because I don't have any Sonuses. I guess it's not natively built in, because unless you have ones with like the Amazon Echo integration in there.
Yeah. Yep.
Interesting. Okay, so that's kind of cool. Also, areas are now supported for fans, covers, automations, counters, alarm control panels, scenes, inputs, wink, and a whole bunch more stuff. So Aaron Bach went ahead and decided, hey, you know what? We're going to expand quite a bit of stuff in that in that front. So thanks a lot, Aaron. That's great.
Yeah, I was looking at all these in the release. I was like, wow, like I actually kind of forgot that areas had been added to the Home Assistant, and I think now with this new update, I think it's going to really bring areas as a more feature that can be used now.
Yeah. Actually, I have an update of my own to add to this.
Oh, please.
Well, just not really to Home Assistant, but more just my personal setup. Because I'm selfish and I want to talk about myself right now.
Do it.
So I decided a couple of weeks ago on Twitter, I posted saying just, what are people using for Zigbee and so on and so forth. So I'm happy to say I received a Conb 2 day before yesterday.
Nice.
And plugged it into my Raspberry Pi, slapped Haz.io on that. And it's actually my first time using Haz.io, believe it or not, because I run it on Docker normally.
Wow.
Yeah.
I know. And big step. But so I'm planning on having a dual Home Assistant setup, one for my Zigbee stuff with ZHA.
Yep.
And one that stuff that I'm running already on my Docker containers. And so far it's worked really well. I've got a couple of, I've just got one motion sensor and one water leak detector added so far, but I'm going to eventually start moving everything off of SmartThings and onto this. So I'm pretty excited for that.
That's cool.
Yeah. So
what brand of the motion sensor and water leak have you got?
So it's actually the SmartThings brand. So what happened is, because I have the SmartThings today, and I've used the integration with SmartThings and Home Assistant to basically bring the state of all those devices in. And for whatever reason, on Prime Day, actually, Best Buy had a great sale on all of this SmartThings gear. So I picked up 4 motion sensors and, I don't know, I think 4 or 6 motion sensors and 4 water leak sensors and that kind of thing. And I got thinking, kind of going, okay, well, if I add this to SmartThings, it's almost a step backwards for me, because in the back of my head, I've been wanting to get rid of SmartThings, to get rid of that hub for a while. Mm-hmm. And the reason is because the SmartThings integration is great, but it's a little bit like once in a while it does break, or once in a while you run into some issues. So I'm hoping by moving to this, it's going to be a little more stable to that than that. SmartThings to actually connect to the devices and stuff has been very stable. It's been very good that way. Yep. I just don't like their programming interface or anything like that. So I prefer Home Assistant for that. So again, it's purely a personal preference thing. There's zero reason why I needed to do this, but I think I'm hoping to improve the stability of my of that interface. So right now, for example, my light switches that are in my house, the non-Lutron ones that I have from before, those run Z-Wave, and those guys, if I tell Home Assistant to turn it on or off, it doesn't actually do anything, because that integration once in a while breaks. So even on my Echo, I've actually have those devices excluded and going directly through SmartThings. So it's not the most ideal setup. So Conb 2 and ZHA. So thank you everyone for your input. I just wanted to say, give a shout out to everybody that gave me their suggestions there.
I'm very interested because I've just undertaken a little project of myself. So I was having also like Zigbee issues I talked about in the last episode.
Yeah.
And so I ended up moving into 3 Zigbee networks essentially. So I've got 2 instances of Zigbee to MQTT running in the house, one at each end of the house. And for the middle of the house, because I have those Lightify light bulbs that don't seem to mesh very well, and they're stuck in the middle of the house, they don't talk to either one. There's another network running there just for those lights. So the So yeah, essentially I've split my house in sort of a third, with a middleman in the middle. They're none of them are communicating with each other, but at least much more stable now. But that's why I'm hoping that the Combi in the future will hopefully replace everything. And so I'll be interested to see how you get on with yours.
Yeah, and one thing I learned through all of this is actually, luckily I got ahead of it and actually did a little more research than I probably normally would before doing something like this. And one thing I realized is because I was going to go with decons, which is kind of the software that comes with the Combi,
Yes,
right?
yep.
By the manufacturer, I believe their name is Dresden Electronic.
Correct.
So I was going to go with that, but they actually only support one of the SmartThings components. I think they support the motion sensor natively, not the water leak sensor. So just and I noticed on the forums, a lot of people did have issues with that in the past. So, and everybody's like, well, I use ZHA and it works great. So I use ZHA and so far it works great. So the response time is decent too.
Yeah, there's been so many updates to ZHA recently too. Like they've done a lot of work making it really easy to configure in Home Assistant natively and that. So yeah, really cool to see how you get on with that.
Yeah, and Paula suggested ZHA as well, and I think it's so far it's been. I mean, with the two devices I've got in there, it works great. But I'll make sure to update on that once in a while. Let's see how it goes.
If we're doing personal updates, I'm going to do a quick service announcement if I can. So as you guys are aware, Today I'm running from a 3G connection because I have no internet at home.
Yeah.
So I had the perfect storm last weekend. Friday, just before lunch, I got an alert to say that my Home Assistant was offline thanks to my DuckDNS, and Uptime Robot sent me an alert to say it was down. I've been without internet for over a week now. So that day I actually left, like perfect storm, I left straight from the office and had to go to the airport because I was going interstate for the weekend. So my wife got home after dropping me at the airport and couldn't fix the internet. So because everything in the house is Zigbee, all the lights were on. She had to use light switches because the local network, for whatever reason, wasn't working. I'm guessing we had a power failure or something. It was the perfect storm. I wasn't there to fix it. So Sunday night I got home, spoke to the ISP, and they said, yep, look, we're going to have to get a technician out. Upshot of it is I still don't have any internet, but there are some learnings that I'm sort of going to do a post-mortem and do a blog post about it because I've learned a lot, things that I can change, Home Assistant-wise that I can change, to make things work. But one thing I do want to just give a quick shout-out is to Plex users, and this is something that's really frustrated me with Plex, is that Plex actually requires an active internet connection before you can start playing any of your local media, and it's something that I wasn't expecting, and it wasn't something that's like, why would you need that? So I have an LG WebOS TV. You can't actually open any apps, including Plex, without an internet connection on that TV.
Oh, that's so frustrating.
That is frustrating. So I was like, that's fine. I've got the Roku still connected to the TV. The Roku wouldn't let me connect to Plex. It would see that I had media on there, but as soon as I started playing something, it would just cancel and saying, sorry, there's too many errors. You can't play this item. And I couldn't set the time on the Roku without an active internet connection.
Right.
Which was really frustrating, right? Like, why do I need the internet to tell the Roku what the time is? I can just put it in myself. So I thought, that's fine. Maybe it's a Roku thing. So I went to my old LG, Samsung TV. The Plex UI on this thing, it's like a 2013 model TV. So the Plex UI hasn't been updated since then.
Right.
Still couldn't run any local media. So, yeah, I'm very frustrated with Plex. I would encourage, if you do have a Plex server running at home, do unplug your internet for a while, maybe log out of Plex and try and just do a test yourself, see if you can get your local media playing locally. For whatever reason, I couldn't get it running. As soon as I eventually, because we've been without internet now for a week, I was able to plug in an old phone into my router and get a SIM card, a data SIM card. As soon as I did that, Plex has been able to play media now. So I don't know what bizarre. It is. It is really bizarre. I had to edit some XML files to enable, to bypass authentication locally and all that. That still didn't work. So I don't know what it is, but it's, really frustrating. And
so it's actually one of the biggest complaints that Plex users have on the forums. I mean, people talk about it all the time. I think MB might have the same problem. I can't remember.
Really?
Yeah. So what I actually do is I run a small instance of mini DLNA as a backup, just in case, and share my media out via DLNA.
Right.
Because most TVs and Rokus and things like that can actually play DLNA natively over the network.
Yeah. So Plex, I found in my Plex server there was an option, enable DLNA server. So I ticked that on, and I was able to then get the Rokus to start seeing all the media I had. It was a really
awesome.
Crappy library. It was awesome until I decided to press play on an item, and then for whatever reason, I've got like 1080p content on my NAS. It was buffering and couldn't watch the thing locally because it was trying. I'm guessing for whatever magic Plex does, the DLNA clients just didn't have the same codecs, so it was struggling to stream it. So yeah. I mean, I don't know. It's frustrating. I don't know what the answer is. At the moment, it was just get an internet connection.
Yeah, that's weird. Because I always assumed it would work without internet. So that's I guess I got to try that too.
Yeah, but I would encourage anyone, if you think your home automation system can withstand, like we all talk about home system, not relying on the cloud and anything. I would just encourage people. I wish I'd done this beforehand. Just unplug the internet and see what falls over, because there was a lot of surprising stuff that I've found out the hard way.
It's almost like you need. I don't know if you've heard of Chaos Monkey. It's a tool I believe built by Netflix, which basically goes around and breaks stuff in production for testing.
Oh,
right?
nice.
So, and because the idea is nothing should break, especially in a scale of Netflix, right?
Yes.
So you almost need Chaos Monkey for HA, right? So for home automation, just to say, okay, you know what's going to happen if I break this? What happens if I break that? And it's like, okay, if it's an isolated break, cool, no problem. What happens if I break the internet? Okay, well, what falls over, right? At least that way you have some idea of what's breaking and what like what's actually going to fall over and what's not. So that might be kind of interesting.
Yeah. Well, I found things like I had a lot of automations that were relying on the weather outside. And because I didn't have an internet connection, those sensors were unavailable, so the automations wouldn't trigger. So it's not Home Assistant's fault, it's my Logic's fault, right? So now all of a sudden I've added, additional sensors to ping the Google DNS and detect when the internet's offline to ignore those sort of conditions.
Yeah, or put some kind of a fallback condition, right? No internet means do this instead.
Yeah. So a big learning curve I've had this week, but
wow,
we'll see.
It's funny because in 2019 now, having a week without internet is like, what's going on?
I am so millennial. We don't have a TV antenna connected, so we live off streaming and Plex, right? And it's been tough, right? We've chewed through our mobile data connections just trying to keep ourselves entertained. So
it's like you're in the dark ages again.
I am, yeah. But I've finally got Home Assistant running again, so I'm happy with that.
There you go. Caveman Phil.
All right. Brandon, this is your time to shine, and you've got a really cool setup. So first, I think we need to start with, how you got here. So you're obviously using Home Assistant. So how are you using Home Assistant in your home?
Wow. So in a myriad of ways. Home Assistant is, it's a hobby, it's an addiction, it's a way to flex a technical muscle in a lot of different ways. It is. Yeah. And unfortunately, my whole family understands that now. But so I got started with Home Assistant a few years ago when, Raspberry Pis came out and you wanted a fun way to be able to blink an LED. And being a software engineer, I wrote my own web front end, probably in PHP at the time, and just to blink an LED. And I saw Home Assistant, and it was starting to come together, but it wasn't quite what I was looking for, and I was determined to write my own thing, which was a terrible idea. But as Home Assistant matured, I would constantly grab other IoT devices and try to look for Python libraries, and every single time, Home Assistant would pop up as one of the integration pieces. I'm like, all right, well, maybe it's time to check this out again. And since then, I've got everything from, Ecobees and Google Homes, Casa by TP-Link.
It's amazing how it grows so quickly.
It's
right?
wild.
It starts off with one little thing, and then all of a sudden, I need to get that too, and bam, there you go.
Well, I liked it too because the flexibility. So I'm a maker, and I build a lot of, prototypey and little hobby electronics projects, and with the REST APIs and different scripts and stuff, I can really bend it to do exactly what I want it to do 9 times out of 10.
Wow, that's very cool. So you've been doing this for a little bit then?
Yeah.
That's cool. How about like home automation in general? Like what's did you start with like anything way before, like as a kid, like or anything like that, or?
Yeah. So in college I worked at Radio Shack, which is a electronics retailer. Well, it used to be here in the United States. And I had a pretty good discount on, what was it, X10, all those switches and whatnot. So had too many of those, didn't know what to do with it. Tried to, make it work with, over like a serial bus, which was always interesting and never really got to work right. But that was my first kind of jump in. With that came, the slippery slope to Logitech with their Harmony line and trying to find IR frequencies for non-TV and AV equipment and make it bend to my will and things like that. So that was a slippery slope. And then, once the Raspberry Pi came along, it kind of accelerated the IoT space, especially with the maker community, and the floodgates just opened up. And what I actually got started with Home Assistant in is I started building a bar here at my house and a kegerator. So I brew my own beer, and I wanted to build a smart bar. So the big thing at first was just an LED strip, which was a 50/50 SMD LED, reel that you can get off Amazon. And this was
cheap.
Oh yeah, nice and cheap. This was before they had the Wi-Fi controllers and things like that. So I built a IR sniffer and IR blaster with the Raspberry Pi to be able to turn the lights on and off just via the Raspberry Pi. And I scripted that in with my local sports teams, like huge fan of the Baltimore Ravens and the Hokies, Virginia Tech Hokies football team. And I wanted it to come on game day and actually change the color to, the mascot or the team's official colors. And so I scripted that all up with Python, and I thought there's got to be a better way to do this. And with Home Assistant, it gave me a platform where I didn't have to necessarily write everything in Python code, but could extrapolate it out with automations. And that's what really got me to look back at Home Assistant and start building everything into that platform.
That's awesome. Okay, so just run me how your bar is automated. So like what automations have you got that Home Assistant's managing for you?
So it started off as a Home Assistant gig, and then I actually built it out, and it's an open source project. You can find it on GitHub called Boozer. And so the whole concept, it's a platform to monitor, your local bar or kegerator, where you can actually track, how much beer is passed through the line, the temperature of the beer, exact pour volumes, and there's some alert mechanisms there. So what I've actually done to build it is in each beer line, there's actually a flow sensor, which is a waterproof Hall effect sensor that is essentially 5 volts on and off, and you measure the delta with a Raspberry Pi. So you set up a Lambda event or trigger that will actually detect when the line opens, and based on the PSI of the beer, which you can calibrate, exactly how much beer flowed through the line based on how long that, the sensor is open.
Yeah.
So I've got that all working with SQLite, and with every pour, it can update an external display. So I use a segmented LED display from Pimeroni called Pi Hat or Pi, I forget what, Scroll Fat. Yeah, it's called Scroll Fat. And what it will actually do is display in real time how much beer is passing through the line. And once you're done pouring the beer, it can tweet out via an embedded Twitter API or post to Slack instantly and say, I just poured 2 pints of this beer at this temperature out of this tap. And I think you can see, I have a Twitter account. I haven't hooked it up lately, but it's called I Built a Bar. And it's got a lot of my drinking history, unfortunately, and shows you exactly. Yeah, because oversharing is caring, right? So
That's right.
Yeah, but it's been great because while, it's fun to tweet things out, the real reason why I built it is because being that it's a kind of a monolithic bar. It's kind of big and it's kind of a pain. I've got, I think 50 pounds of granite sitting on top that I actually have to remove to change out every keg. And I wanted a way to be able to track how much beer is in each keg. So a lot of people and a few different commercial entities actually have gone out and they try to take a scale and measure how much beer is left in each keg by weight. But I found that to be troublesome because the whole ecosystem of inside of a freezer, right? So there's a lot of humidity and the temperature swings and things like that. Plus electronics don't always mix. So I decided to look at it from, the volume perspective about how much volume has gone through the line and subtract it from your standard 5-gallon corny keg. So Boozer actually detects how much beer is passed through each pour, adds that to a SQLite database, and then I can see in real time how much beer is left in each keg. And of course, that's stored in SQLite, but it can actually pump out to MQTT, InfluxDB, and MySQL if you wanted it to, and store it, offline. So I actually graph everything. At first, I was graphing it in Grafana through InfluxDB, and then with Lovelace, completely changing the game, I've actually gone in and created a custom component that shows, in real time, the beer levels in each keg.
Very cool.
That's okay. Yeah. Okay. Wow.
This is cool. Yeah, I'm just on your Twitter right now. Also, I'm now following you. Well, I'm following your par. No, this is really neat. It's so why measure your well,
beer consumption,
how much necessarily
beer
you're
pouring?
drinking, but how much beer outside of like was there an external factor, or was there just like hey, I go through a lot of kegs and I never know when to change it kind of thing? Or
I brew more than I drink.
Okay.
I'm not in college anymore, but it's good. When I have people over and parties and stuff, I wanted to make sure I had enough beer, to say, hey, come on over. Let's.
That's very social responsible of you.
Yeah.
I'm here for the people. So it was just a way for me to know how much beer is left in each keg, and if I need to start brewing again or something like that, without having to pull 50 pounds of granite off this thing just to lift up a keg and shake it. So it's a more efficient way. Plus, being a software engineer and automation nut, I got to find a better way. So.
Yeah, well, because why not, right?
Yeah. Essentially, that's the answer to every question.
That's right. That's right. So how long have you had this, or and how many iterations has this gone through, like from version 0 to version whatever it is now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I actually started building the code before I actually lifted a hammer to work on the bar itself.
Yeah.
I had this idea, and it was too cold. It was during the winter times. I didn't want to be out in the garage, actually woodworking. So I decided to start writing the code first on Python. And it actually had its own web front end at first in PHP because, which was a chore, and I didn't want to maintain it. So that's why I kind of looked at Home Assistant to, outsource some of that UI element and some of the control pieces. So what's actually really cool is if you go on the GitHub website, you can see a picture of the bar, and most people build like home kegerators in two different ways. If they use a chest freezer, they either modify the freezer by extending the top lid up and putting the taps there, so it's still kind of like a rectangle shape, or they do what I did and they put a draft box on top. So think of like another 2.5 by 1.5 foot box that sits on top of this rectangle, and that has all your taps in it. The problem with that is that the top draft box is no longer actively cooled, where the kegs are actively cooled with the chilling component of the chest freezer. So beer has a tendency that if it gets out of bounds of 10 degrees of what it should be, it will start to foam. So I was actually wasting a lot of beer with the first pour every time because of that temperature swing. So what I ended up doing was, with my Raspberry Pi that was running Boozer, I put temperature sensors in the chest freezer and in the draft box, and actually hooked up a SaneSmart 5-volt relay with a 12-volt fan and some ductwork. And I, in a Python script, constantly checked to see if the temperature swings were outside of 10 degrees, and if so, cut on this fan and blow cold air from the bottom chest freezer to actively cool the draft box and reduce those temperature swings.
Interesting.
Wow.
Okay.
So I was doing that all in Python, and within the Boozer component, but, I'm more of a fan of decoupling and, microservices if I can try to do that in every way possible and try to make things a little bit simpler. So I ended up pulling that out of the code base and handing it to Home Assistant. So now with Home Assistant, I can sit there and monitor the temperatures, in the actively cooled and passively cooled sections, and it actually can trigger the GPIO pin to cut on the relay and fan and chill the upper draft box dynamically.
Wow.
So essentially, you've got Home Assistant monitoring the temperatures to ensure you get the perfect pour of beer.
Right.
With as less wastage as possible.
Right.
Wow.
I see no downside in this. This is fantastic. 5 stars. Done.
Yeah, it's been a labor of love. I've actually learned a lot in the process, and that's what kind of got me started in this, because I always wanted to do a lot more with like smaller electronics, and I started, I wanted to make a blinking LED in college, and I bought a 555 timer, and I was like, there's got to be a better way. And so then I had way too many Arduinos, and then once the maker community embraced Linux and Raspberry Pis, this was just a method to my learning and a good channel for it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, why not?
Sure.
So do you have any other integrations like into a voice assistant or something to be like, hey, how much beer is left, or how much of whatever keg, let's say keg 1, keg 2, or whatever brand you name it?
Yeah, I have. So I've actually set that up recently. I use Google Home or Google Assistant mostly in my house. I have some Alexas too, but have kind of slowly been transitioning over to the Google platform.
Yeah.
And have set up some triggers to be able to read out, the temperature and how much has been in each keg, or how much volume is left in each keg. So that's more of a, hey, yeah, look, I can do this, not actually functional. Well, it's functional, but I don't use it that often.
Right.
And could you automate the actual serving of beer?
Yeah, so that's interesting. There are some products that I've seen that will actually close a beer line via a servo mechanism and a valve.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But being that beer is pressurized, it's not as easy as like a servo closing a valve with a typical water line or something like that, because I think I set most of my beers to come out around 13 PSI. And so technically, if you left a tap open and had like a servo closing the valve, you could do that. It's just something I haven't gone down the road for, and I'm okay with the way I have it right now.
Fair enough.
Yeah, that's cool. I saw a demo at, I was in New York in January for the National Retail Federation show. So the customers I cover are in the retail space, so I had to go for work. It was pretty cool. And one company actually had a fully automated bar. So I don't know if they had beer, but basically it used a touchscreen panel where it would actually, with a camera embedded in it, it would do facial recognition and say, hey, you know what? You look like you're about blank years old. And based on that, and then again, they'll still verify ID and stuff. And then based on that, it'll actually dispense, hey, what do you want? You want a Cuba Libre? You want a whatever, right? Like, and it'll actually go out and so there'd be an attendant or a bartender essentially that just places the cup in, and it would go, and through different lines, it would go and pull specific alcohols, pull whatever. So I thought it was actually kind of cool, but I guess it's a different challenge here too, because it's not like, you can't really have one of those like instant shot kind of, I forget what they're called, but the little spring-loaded shot mechanism, right? So with beer, but it's still pretty cool. I'll send you a video of that offline if you want. But it's
what's funny about that. It's funny you bring that up, because I've heard of those. I've never seen one in person, but from what I hear, they started in Vegas and then moved their way to like cruise ships and stuff. And why they actually came to be, other than the wow factor, was actually for inventory control.
Yeah.
So rather than like bartenders passing out free drinks, everything was like mechanized and tracked, which is actually why some people have approached me like with commercial opportunities with Boozer, talking about, hey, my bar loses too much beer. This would be a way for me to actually do inventory control in beer, which I can't do today. Which, sounds great. I'm a cloud architect in my real life, and I just wanted to open source this, and if anyone wants to run with it, they can. But it's an idea.
Very cool.
Yeah, because I can see a lot of commercial applications. I remember here in Melbourne a long time ago now, there used to be a bar. It was similar to a stock exchange, and based on what drink was being ordered the most would dictate the price. So the more people that went up and bought brand A, the higher the price would go. Yeah, so combine it with Boozer, you could definitely automate that pricing. So yeah, really cool.
That's very cool. But also, I also very strongly dislike the idea of my alcohol not being consistently priced.
Yeah.
Well, now, your assistant can say, hey, you've had too much to drink. We're cutting you off. All right? Like, that's it.
Yeah. You like beer a little too much. That's funny.
So I'm guessing, Brandon, so you've got, your bar automated. So if you've been able to automate that or, put some cool sensors around that, what else have you added around your home to automate and track?
Yeah, sure. So I've done a few things that are kind of out of the box that, are worth talking about. One of which I know last episode or last release, you were talking about the new vacuum component where you can actually bake that out into vacuums that don't support, Home Assistant or APIs natively.
Yep.
And I'm doing a different way. I definitely want to use that platform once I get some time to try it out. But I actually have a Eufy vac from Anker, which is a RoboVac, kind of similar to Roomba. I have a Roomba as well, but I've got a Eufy vac, and it's called a PetVac 11. I forget which one, but it's actually got Google Assistant and Alexa capabilities, but no other API mechanism. So I've set up a open source project called Assistant Relay, which runs on my local Kubernetes cluster and just lives out there with a dynamic DNS entry within my home network. And I can fling it curl commands to actually talk to Google Assistant as if my voice was. So I can type there and say, turn on the RoboVac with a curl command and hit this Assistant Relay, and it'll talk to Google and turn on the vacuum cleaner.
That's really cool, actually.
Yeah, so I'm using the scripting component within Home Assistant to turn on and off my vacuum cleaner via Home Assistant, even though natively it can only talk to Google.
Interesting.
So yeah, you'll be able to eventually use that template vacuum cleaner component to then use those scripts, and then you can have Home Assistant completely manage that vacuum cleaner. That is a great use case for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So looking forward to that. Another one that I recently put together was with my Xbox and Logitech Harmony. I actually I have a Harmony hub that can sit there and control my AV devices remotely. And I have an Xbox One, and I travel a good bit for work, and sometimes I want to play remotely. And I use this app where I can actually pull up my Xbox over my VPN back to my house natively on my MacBook. The problem with that is that I normally play, in the middle of the night when I get back from work, and it actually turns on my Xbox, which over HDMI CEC will turn on everything else in my AV stack, including the volume. And, I've got a 2-year-old at the house and my wife, and they don't want me, they don't want to hear Call of Duty at 2 a.m. when,
that makes sense.
I am 400 miles away. So with Home Assistant, what I've actually done is with presence detection with my Ubiquity stack, Unify stack, I have where whenever my Xbox turns on, it will check to see if my phone or my person is home. And if I'm not, it will automatically mute my AV system connected to the Xbox.
Cool.
So I can sit there and play remotely without the volume going out through the speakers and waking up everyone in the house.
So does the TV still turn on in that case?
It does, which is unfortunate, and I need to find a way to turn that off. I can turn it off with the Harmony Hub, but I haven't done the testing to ensure that doesn't then turn off my Xbox. Because you know how HDMI CEC can be two-way, and
Interesting.
So I'm guessing you couldn't just put a smart switch on the TV and kill power to the TV in that case?
I certainly could. Yeah, that's actually an idea too that I hadn't thought about, but I'll think about that.
As long as, once again, you don't have that two-way HDMI CEC problem.
Right.
That might be a simple way to just take it out of the mix.
Yeah, and it's funny you bring up power. So I've been doing a lot with power lately. Even though it's going to sound like it, I don't really... my power bill is a lot lower than it should be. I think power is cheap in this area of the country. But I've actually been working on this new project that I'm hoping to open source soon that actually does power monitoring with a US software or USB software defined radio. So I found this project. I think the guy's name is B Masher. I originally wrote it. It's a Golang library that can use an off-the-shelf USB software-defined radio. You can pick up at Amazon for $20.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And with that, you can actually grab over the air your power meter reading in real time. And
for like the house, for
like the whole house,
meter.
The whole house, yeah. And ironically enough, you can pick it up for the whole neighborhood because apparently these things blast out a lot more than you think. But once I was able to find which one was my house, I'm able to pull in real time exactly what the meter is. And by using deltas and feeding it into Home Assistant and InfluxDB, I can actually track in real time my whole home power usage completely over the air with a USB software defined radio.
Wow, that's cool.
So I've got it hooked up with automations. I went in and found out the power delta with things like my washing machine, my dishwasher, my dryer. And my wife and I both use Home Assistant via the iOS app, and I use the notification platform to notify us whenever each one of those stops its cycle.
That is cool.
So what if you're running the dishwasher and the washing machine at the same time? How do you...
I'm screwed.
Don't.
Yeah, that's why I want to open source it, right? Someone else can figure that out.
Yeah.
No, that's a great point. It's just one of those things I've been toying with, and I want a nice way to be able to see graphs of my power usage. And I also wrote another component that's actually out on my GitHub right now that will allow you to take a UPS and uninterruptible power supply and take the reading directly from that on a Raspberry Pi or other device and shove it directly into MQTT. So, or InfluxDB, but MQTT is very popular with the Home Assistant community for good reason. So I have UPSs all over my house, my server rack and, my desk and other places throughout my house. So I can get, more detailed fine-grained power monitoring statistics directly from those.
Yeah, that's cool.
That's neat.
No, one of the other things I'm interested in, I know I kind of teed this up to you guys in email, but I'm a huge fan of Hazio, and
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I actually didn't use it for years, and I shied away from it because it seemed kind of like the newbie way of running Home Assistant. Rohan, just like you, I always ran in Docker, and that just worked for me.
Yeah.
But then I started seeing components being added like ESP Home, which I'm a huge fan of and just cannot get enough of because I run a lot of ESP8266s and 32s around the house for PIR presence detection and temperature sensing and things like that. And it was just a natural way of installing those secondary components without, running the Dockers myself and things like that. So I started using Hazio, but I wanted to run Hazio and Kubernetes. So for those who don't know, Kubernetes is a distributed computing platform that allows you to run Docker containers at scale across different types of hardware, different servers, Raspberry Pis, and do it dynamically where you don't care what runs. I know, Phil, you were saying you wanted high availability for your internet and for Plex and things like that.
Yeah.
The great thing about Kubernetes is it allows that, high availability, fault tolerant platform to do Docker containers. So that's what I do in my day job. So I wanted to set up something similar at home, which my whole stack outside of Home Assistant actually runs in Kubernetes. So I've been working on a project. I'm very early on. I've got it somewhat working where I'm actually using the Hazio code base, but rather than talking to the Docker daemon locally on the device that runs Hazio, I talk to the Kubernetes API. Nice. So dynamically, I can run Home Assistant and all of its underlying components throughout my home network on different classes of servers in a high available manner. Where, if my wife kicks the cable on, the server rack, the server down in the garage will keep chugging with Home Assistant and I don't have any downtime.
Yeah, see, that's really cool. I mean, it's definitely overkill for, a home automation system, but I absolutely love this sort of stuff, right? My question to you would be, how do you go about local devices? For example, if you've got a Z-Wave radio plugged in to a USB device upstairs, how do you go about ensuring that remains available over the whole Home Assistant instance?
Yeah, that's definitely the problem. So, I'm not using Z-Wave quite yet. I'm definitely interested in doing it, but I am using like that USB software-defined radio, and I only have one of those. So you can't do a lot of high availability, especially with Home Assistant, if you have to register with a certain like hardware ID or MAC address or something like that. It's going to be a little bit more difficult. But, you got to start somewhere. And if you need to replicate, hardware, in some instances you could do that, but, got to start somewhere.
Yeah. I'm guessing that a lot of the stuff I'm trying to move over now is to move a lot of components over to MQTT. So that way, at least, because I run, 2 instances of Home Assistant, they can at least use MQTT as the bridge to share the data amongst each other. So, things like, and there's a lot of projects coming in, like Zigbee to MQTT, there's now Z-Wave to MQTT.
Right.
So, yeah, I think, moving a lot of stuff over to that would definitely solve that issue.
Well, it's funny you mentioned, the hardware disparity with like different nodes and things like that, because that's actually a problem I have right now. All of my Home Assistant configurations, I run through Jenkins, which is a DevOps CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous delivery platform that allows me to test to make sure things are working properly. And that's something I can't do right now with a few of my scripts because they depend on that hardware being there. And so it's a similar problem. And I think what you could actually do in certain instances, I've never played with this, but some people do have USB over network type of configurations, which I don't know if you guys have ever messed with. I haven't.
No, I've seen it. I've never messed with it. We've used to have a couple in my old lab at our old office, but I never got a chance to play with those.
So that could be, a solution. You could have your USB Z-Wave as a service or something like that over your network.
A lot of people that have a Vera controller, they have found a way to, because the Vera you can SSH into it. They've, managed to, disconnect the Vera UI or the Vera software from the Z-Wave radio inside those units. And then, same thing, just expose that radio over USB to the internet and then use it that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, one other thing, I just, while you guys were talking at the beginning of the podcast, I was on the Home Assistant subreddit, and I see the Wisecam. Wisecam is a Xiaomi rebrand here in the United States, and I know it's starting to trickle out, but apparently they've added a sensor line, relatively cheap, that comes with a USB dongle for some type of RF, sensing. And apparently a guy named Name is Young Dev has written a new library for Home Assistant. They'll actually allow you to use the sensors, and they're battery operated motion and contact sensors, and they're only $5 and $6 a piece.
That's not bad.
So I was looking to do Z-Wave, but if this works out, it might be something to approach as an alternative.
Yeah, that's not bad.
The only thing I like, so I've always found Z-Wave to be like really rock solid. It generally just works, right? Whereas Zigbee and everything else, it's very dependent on what you buy. Like the Xiaomi stuff is generally okay, but it might not talk to every other manufacturer out there.
Right.
Yeah. And you see that a lot with a lot of open standards like that, right? Because a lot of times it's open to interpretation.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
Whereas something proprietary like like Z-Wave is a lot more strictly controlled.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, there's something to be said about proprietary stuff there, right? But again, Zigbee is typically cheaper because it is open source or open. It's an open protocol.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys have seen NVIDIA came out in March with what's called the Jetson Nano platform.
Yep.
ARM64 based, system on a chip board that actually includes a 128 core CUDA GPU. That's an NVIDIA GPU.
Yep.
Which is huge. And they've geared it towards makers. It's got a GPIO pin layout that's identical to the Raspberry Pi. And, it's USB 3. It's got an M2 slot. So it was the Raspberry Pi 4 before the Raspberry Pi 4, but there's still some, great things that kind of put it in a different class, all for $100. So I actually bought 3 of those, and I'm running them in a Kubernetes cluster locally here at home. But I'm starting to work with TensorFlow and trying to use that 128 core GPU to do more image detection and image analysis directly with Home Assistant. So I think it was probably like 6 episodes ago, you guys were talking about the streaming platform and TensorFlow. And the creator, one of the first things he said was, don't do this on your Raspberry Pi. You have to use, a 64-bit x86 based architecture to do this. And I think I've started working with Has.io and trying to get integration through the Docker daemon with the GPIO, the GPU underlying system. And I'm starting to have some good successes. So I'm hoping this might be an opportunity for, the ARM-based communities to still have some success with TensorFlow and Home Assistant.
Yeah, with an extra, essentially strap-on box here.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not even it's completely self-contained. So the GPU, I know, Google came out with Coral, which is a different USB stick that you plug in a Raspberry Pi.
Yeah.
This is actually self-contained within the computer, if you will, the system on a board. So it's still, $100 and you can run with it. And it does run Has.io fine out of the box. It's just getting the GPU to be integrated. I'm having some trouble, but I'm having some early successes.
Very cool. Okay. Well, I mean, I'd love to see how that project goes because this is something I'm interested in. But this is that's very cool. Yeah, I was familiar with the Jetsons, and again, I know a couple of people at work that have those, and they do a lot of stuff specifically with TensorFlow with that. But
sure,
yeah, it's very cool.
And so, are you looking to map a certain object? Is that what you're trying to do with it? Or?
It's one of those things. Why? Because I can. So I have some cameras around the house, I'm actually starting to get into the ESP cam market with the ESP8266s, and because they're very cheap and very lightweight. And being that I have a myriad of different, camera providers, Ubiquiti, some Anchor cameras and things like that, I wanted a centralized platform where I could do image analysis rather than being, stovepiped into the different manufacturers. So that's why I'm kind of looking to bring it on to Has.io and do things like person detection and presence detection based on who the camera sees and other things. I have a 2-year-old and I kind of want to be able to have a trigger here in Home Assistant that says, all right, she's still in her crib, she's good. Or, send us an alert or turn on a light or something when she's out of the crib.
Right.
And actually do that with visual analysis rather than just some other type of trigger.
Yeah, like a motion sensor or, a floor, pressure sensor or something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's really cool, actually. So we'll leave links to Brandon's Boozer project and all that in the show notes, so you can check that out as well. Brandon, thank you so much for taking the time to explain Boozer to us and everything like that. We really appreciate you taking the time for us.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. It's been a pleasure.
This has been awesome. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
If you want to share your Home Assistant journey or come on as a guest, reach out to us at feedback@hasspodcast.io. That's HASS podcast.io.
The Home Assistant podcast is hosted by Phil Hawthorne and myself, Rohan Karamandi. For links to topics that we discussed today, check out our show notes on hasspodcast.io.